Om Asato Ma Sadagamaya Tamaso Maham Jyotirgamaya Riturmam Amritam Gamaya Avir Ahavir Maedhi Rudra Yate Dakshinam Mukham Te Namaha Pahinityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality, and reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. So my subject this morning is, what is spirituality? And we are all devotees and spiritual aspirants. And as such, our ultimate concern is with the human spirit, as opposed to physical and material things. The spirit is that immaterial part of ourselves which transcends the body and the mind and the senses, and which is more interior than our self-image, our persona, our self-concept. It is our very self. The spirit is our self. It is our self-consciousness. It is our essential nature. It's the essence of our being. It is our soul. It is the spark of divinity within us. The spirit, that is our spiritual self, our consciousness, is the subject. It's not the object. And in ancient times, there was a philosophy, the Sankhya philosophy, very similar to the Vedanta philosophy, and a good introduction. Sankhya just means enumeration. And those ancient philosophers counted and logically sorted everything in the universe into 25 cosmic categories. And then in order to make it easy for us, they reduced them to two: the subject and the object. Prakriti and Purusha, nature and the soul. Now by nature, so we have two principles. By nature, these philosophers, they're not referring to wilderness areas or national parks. They're referring to the sum total of the physiosphere, the biosphere, the noosphere, all that we can imagine, that are gross, subtle, and causal aspects of this extra, the macrocosm and the microcosm. And so pretty much everything is Prakriti. That is its nature. We could say it's stuff. It's all just stuff. And over and apart from all this stuff is pure consciousness. And that is ourself. That is our spirit soul. That's our soul. You have a soul. You're a self-conscious being. Now, sometimes it's difficult for us to wrap our brains around the idea of ourself and the idea of consciousness and our soul. And therefore, the Vedantic scriptures give us at least two good analogies, or let's call them similes. Two similes that will help us to understand the essential nature of our consciousness, that is, the spirit within us. The first is that consciousness is like light. And if you can visualize, well, in the Panchadashi, it gives the analogy there of the lamp in the theater. And if you can visualize a theater, maybe in ancient times, and people would file into the theater and the stage. And there was the stage, and there was the orchestra. The curtains open, and the play begins. But up above the audience and the players, there is the lamp. There's the light that continues to burn. That's like our consciousness, illumining everything. The light goes down and illumines everything in the music hall, illumines and touches and reveals each and every person in the theater. And it illumines everyone, all the actors on the stage and all the musicians. Everything is enabled by that light. And yet that light is perfectly detached. It doesn't think, it doesn't feel, it doesn't say anything, it doesn't do anything. That is the nature of our true self, called the witness. The witness is the light source that illumines everything. It's all like that. One simile for kind of helping us to grasp our spirituality, that is our spiritual self. A second simile that's helpful to us compares consciousness, tells us that consciousness is unlimited. It's like space. When you think about space, you know that space is, well, as far as you go, there's more space beyond. That is, space is there's no limit to space. There's no threshold. It's infinite. Similarly, it is with consciousness. Consciousness is a principle, like being, that is infinite. And so the very strong claim that's made by the Vedanta philosophy is that you are unlimited. You are an infinite being. And when we say infinite, well, we can think of space. It's a very good analogy. We think of, so we have an open area, we have an open field, and people may come along and they may bring building materials, and they build a house, and they go inside in the house, and they go outside, and they say, now we're inside, now we're outside. But the space remains unchanged. The space is not affected at all. Can't be cut by the sword, can't be wetted by the rain, dried by the wind. It's invulnerable. And because it is infinite, it's one. There can only be one infinite. Because it's one only without a second. These are the definitions for your true self, for your own consciousness, for the spirituality within you, for your own spirit soul. The spirit within you, that is your true self, is perfectly still, doesn't move, doesn't do anything. And so the spirit is perfect stillness. It makes sense. If there's one only without a second, what would move it? There's nothing outside it that would move it or disturb it. It's infinite. Where would it move to? Where would it go? It remains perfectly still. Now you may say, well, this is the description of our true self, that is, our spiritual self, that's given to us in the Vedanta. And you may say, well, that sounds good. That is, we can't help but have kind of an affirmational response to this teaching. But on the other hand, we have to admit to ourselves that we don't feel like we are the light that illumines this universe. We don't feel like we're infinite and unlimited. We certainly don't feel as if we are invulnerable to the sword or the wind or the rain. And our minds are not perfectly still. And so it seems like there's kind of well, and it's true. Vedanta philosophers, well, of course, why is that the case? That's because we're alienated from our true selves. We're distanced from ourselves. We are strangers to ourselves. And so, yes, it often seems as if our higher self, so described in high philosophy, is quite different from our lower self. It's almost as if we have two selves. And if we want to understand what is spirituality, maybe the best way that we can do it is to recall an old allegory that's given to us in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, also in the Mundaka Upanishad in chapter 5, about the spirit bird. Now, in this allegory, now an allegory, you know, it's not a simile. It's not an analogy. It's not a metaphor. It's more like a story. So here we're going to have a little story that's like, has a setting, it has some characters, has a situation, complication, and crisis, and the whole denouement. It's a story of our life and of our condition. Visualize, for example, a great forest. And in the forest with all those mighty trees everywhere, maybe a gentle breeze is blowing. And there we can single out, there's one tree. We look more closely at that tree, and we can see that there are two birds perched on the self-same tree. The one bird is on the lower branch, one is on the lowest branch. And it's hopping around. It's very busy. It's eating the sweet and the bitter fruits. And the second bird, and they look both the same. But the second bird is perched on the highest branch. Is seated quietly, majestically, the witness of the whole forest, looks on without eating. So meanwhile, this lower bird is hopping around, gets a sweet fruit, enjoys it, then gets a bitter fruit, and is very disgusted, and is disappointed, stops and hesitates for a moment, and then chances to look up. And there he sees that higher bird, not suffering from any disappointment, on that higher branch, thinking, yes, I wish I was like that. Maybe he jumps up one branch, but then he gets distracted again. Eating the sweet fruits, eating the bitter fruits. He gets a particularly bitter fruit, and feels disgusted, stops, begins to do some introspection, then looks up, sees that higher bird, gets inspired, jumps up one branch, gets distracted again. And so like this, time passes. And little by little, he's hopping up the branches. And then when he gets very near the top, an amazing thing happens. That is, he looks up, he sees that higher bird, and then he just takes one jump up, and he merges into that higher bird. And in fact, we see that really there was only one bird all along. You know how in a forest, sometimes the breeze is blowing and the leaves are, the sun is shining, and we have reflections in the leaves of the trees, and oftentimes there are illusions in those leaves. And so here on this tree there was an illusion of two birds, but really there was only one bird all along. And that's the spirit bird. That is our own true self. So this is the allegory in the Upanishads that, well, let's look more closely at the symbolism of this allegory. The lower bird is our everyday walking around conscious self. That is to say, it's the natural man. It's our conventional self. It's our phenomenal ego. It's the person that we think of as ourself. We are the jivatma. Sanskrit, that means the embodied self. We're embodied. We are subject to spiritual ignorance, and hence we've forgotten our true nature, and we identify with our physical flesh and blood body, which is made of the 5 elements. And under the influence of avidya, we are identified with the mind, with the 4 faculties, and with the ego. And our life goal, pretty much, is to find happiness. And by happiness, of course, what we mean by happiness is sense pleasure and ego gratification. This is why happiness is not the goal of life in Vedanta. The goal of life is self-knowledge, understanding your true nature. It's not the pursuit of happiness and pleasure. But this is the jivatma. This is the lower bird. He's in pursuit of this goal. He seeks out the sweet action. That's a karmic act of karma. Leaves an impression. And they propel our next actions. And we get caught in what Dr. Sigmund Freud called a repetition compulsion. And we find ourselves locked into these endless cycles, vicious cycles of karma. And hence we find those are like links in a chain. That means we're bound. That's why we're bound. Because everything we do is impelled and compelled by desire, and leaves an impression and reinforces our bondage. And as long as we live in pursuit of happiness, then that will be our condition. And we're born, and we live our lives, and we die, and then we're born again. And so it goes on in life after life. And round and round we go in the great wheel of reincarnation. And we live in this world of suffering called samsara. That's the lower bird. Now let's look here at the symbolism of the higher bird. The higher bird is your true self. The higher bird is when you've realized your true nature. You become the light of lights. You become infinite. One realized that you are one only without a second. And then the enlightened sage lives in the world as the witness of the sattvic mind. That means after enlightenment, if the mind comes down to the lower plane of this world, relative world, then the enlightened person lives as the witness. That is, he has discrimination between the real and the unreal, and renunciation. And he is the embodiment of all spiritual qualities and spiritual virtues. This is the nature of the saint, the sage, the mystic, the hero. He is the embodiment of all these spiritual virtues. He sees God, he has realized God within himself. He sees God in everything. And as a result of which, he feels within himself, all happiness is within, his joy is within, his light is within. He sees that light in all beings, and he regards all beings with great altruism and compassion. So this is the higher bird. And the two birds on the tree, well, our subject this morning here is what is spirituality? Now let's look here at this word spirituality. Spirituality is a very abstract word. It's an itty word. Morality, identity, religiosity, reality. These are all, so we're trying, our ideal it is to embrace these abstract terms, that is our spirituality, our divinity. Spirituality just means divinity. Divinity just means light. The word, that's the etymology of the word. It means the shining being. So when talking about your spirituality, it's talking about the divinity within you. That is yourself. That is your spirit soul. And the goal of spiritual life is to embrace the divinity within us. That is to say, what is spirituality? It's just the process of hopping up the tree. And what's the goal of the lower bird? The goal here is to realize our true nature. The goal of all things in the universe is to be what it really is. That's our goal. Our goal is to be who we really are. Who we really are is our true self. Our goal in life, therefore, is to become one with our true self. The lower bird becomes one with the higher bird. Swami Vivekananda says, each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity within us. Divinity here means spirituality. Our reality, our authenticity. Our goal is to manifest our spirituality within by controlling nature. And by that he's referring here to different forms of yoga sadhana, that is spiritual practices. And the spiritual practices just means the things that we do to hop up the tree. There's different things that we can do. Anything that we do that enables us to move closer and become one with our true nature is a form of yoga. That is, yoga is just the right way. It's the right way to realize our true nature. And as we do so, that we find that our spirituality, that is our awareness, our true nature, becomes more and more manifest. That as a bird, just think of the bird, as he moves up the tree, he's near the top, they're nearer to the center line, horizontally inward towards his true center. And as he continues up the tree, this is the analogy. The analogy is a spatial, vertical analogy. Our goal in life is to go up. It's not to go down. It's to go up. And therefore, our movement is an upward movement. As we move up, we begin to grow more and more in detachment. That means they begin to leave as we climb up the branches. The sweet and bitter fruits on the lower branches become less and less attractive. As we mature, we're no longer interested in the toys of our childhood. And so by a natural process of maturing, we gradually begin to grow in detachment. This is our spirituality. It's becoming more manifest. Our spirituality becomes more manifest as we do yoga, as we do spiritual practice. And as we do so, we rise up above the conflicts of our mind and our heart and the world. And that's what causes our mental disturbance and our unhappiness, is all conflict. But as we move higher, we find that the conflicts of the lower are resolved. And we gain perspective. We gain objectivity. We no longer find disharmony and conflict between ourselves and others, and between inner conflict within ourselves. And as our spirituality increases, we begin modulating up the branches. That means to higher and higher levels of vibration. We could say into a higher, going from 0 to 1,000 or so. All the spiritual emotions and feelings that we have can all be mapped onto a spectrum. And when we get about 500 or 600, then we begin to manifest spiritual emotions. And begin to, just as we're in the atmosphere, you go up to more and more rarefied and refined vibrational fields. That's the process of spiritual life. So this is how spirituality grows. By the way, you don't have to. You think it sounds like a lot of work. But really speaking, philosophically, it's no work at all, because that is your higher self, your true self, is it's like a helium balloon. And it's all tied down. You see these big balloons, and they're all tied down, maybe, to the ground. Somebody gets in the basket, and they're going to go around the world. And then they have to loosen those ropes. They cast off the ropes that are binding them down. The balloon just goes up by itself. So let's look here at our question. Our question here is, what is spirituality? Sometimes it's helpful when we're trying to grasp and understand an abstract conceptions. It's helpful for us to look at the contrasting words. And sometimes in contrast, we become more clear about the nature of our what we're trying to understand. So we have two words. Let's look at two words. We'll look at two pairs of contrasting pairs. That is to say, words that really refer to different concepts, and yet they're often used. But they're contrasting. They're opposites. Now let's look at two words: spirituality and worldliness. These are two words that are opposites. Now, worldliness Worldliness is a word that you will read a lot about in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And it's an interesting word to us from as students of, in common parlance. The word worldly in ordinary common language, a worldly man, is just a man who's cosmopolitan, who knows his way around. That's a positive kind of description. But in Vedanta, that is to say, in religious language, a lot of these words are going to have their own definition. So in religious language, the worldly man is a person who is defined, his consciousness is externalized. He's sense-bound. He's earth-bound. A worldly man is materialistic, is atheistic. His whole consciousness is characterized by what Sri Ramakrishna says, me and mine. Lust and greed. These are his controlling attitudes, his controlling passions. And the worldly person is a person who, as we read in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, is preoccupied with sense pleasure, with ego gratification, with satisfying the compulsive needs of the lower chakras, and who lives his life kind of like a fly, flying around, landing sometimes on sweet flowers, but sometimes on filth, indiscriminate. Lives life without the first prerequisite for spiritual life, discrimination. Lacking in discrimination. We can compare this worldly man with the other worldly man. That is the devotee, the spiritual person. Spiritual person is more like a bee. A bee just flies all around, lands only on sweet, fragrant flowers. And that's all. That is, a bee has discrimination. So the other worldly man, that is the true devotee, his mind is fixed on higher things. His mind is preoccupied with soul, God, and religion. And worldly, spirituality and worldliness. Let's look at another contrasting pair that'll help us to understand what is spirituality. And that is two words, religion and spirituality. Now, by religion, what we usually mean, we think of the great religions of the world. And by religion in common parlance just means an organized big cultural institution that maybe has a church building and a synagogue and a tabernacle. And you have a whole body of true believers who will meet in that church on a Sunday morning, and they all share a common worldview. And it's a social unit. That is, they may do congregational singing, and may do collective prayer. And the goal, that is to say, the moral ideal of such a religious person is just to be good and to do good. And to attain, maybe as a life goal, to attain salvation through faith and good works. Now we can contrast that idea of a religious person, a religion with spirituality. That is, you don't have to belong to a church or do any kind of congregational singing in order to be spiritual. You don't have to believe in God or do good works in order to be spiritual. Spirituality is all about your it's a personal, individual thing about your relationship with God or with your higher true self. The goal and purpose of a spiritual person. Now remember we're talking here about religious language. Spiritual person is a person whose goal is to become a saint, become a sage, to realize their true self, to attain liberation. And to do so, how? By spiritual practice. By actually, what a spiritual person is interested in, a direct, immediate, personal experience of God. And it's a very individual matter. So, the two contrasting pairs. Now, our subject this morning is what is spirituality. Let's look more closely at 3 pairs of confusables. By confusables here, I mean words that are refer to different things, but which are often confused and used synonymously. And if we can discriminate between them, it'll help us to give a clearer idea of what is spirituality. Now, and spirituality. Let's count religion and spirituality as one of those pairs of a little bit and think pair that more aligns, getting my order here. If I can think about contrasting two things, we talk about spirituality and worldliness. We could also see that in Christian mysticism, that the life of the saints and the sages, they say, is often that we have 3 enemies. They say in Christian mysticism we have 3 enemies in spiritual life. And that is the world, the flesh, and the devil. And spirituality is often characterized as a battle, as a warfare between the spirit and the flesh. And St. Paul, now by what he means by the flesh, it's not the flesh and blood body, but it's all those desires that arise in our mind from an ungodly place. That is from our lower mind. We have a lower mind. And our lower mind is often kind of like our friend. Well, here it's often characterized as warfare. It's not that it's the enemy. The lower mind is our enemy, but actually, maybe it is. Because in the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says that our mind is our own best friend and our own worst enemy. But let's not think of our mind as an enemy. Let's think of our mind, our lower mind, as being like an unruly, misbehaving, naughty child. And that my lower mind has got to be controlled. And what does a child need? Well, he's not evil, but he needs to be controlled. He needs structure. He needs discipline. And so we have the conflict between the wisdom of the parents, that is the spirit and the flesh. And this is the vision here of the desert fathers in ancient Egypt. You remember how their ideal was to live like an angel, to walk in the spirit, to control their lower nature. Angels don't eat, they don't sleep, and they just spend their nights in prayer and austerity. That was their ideal. That's a spiritual ideal. And so we can contrast the two, the spirit and the flesh. So then we have these different word pairs. Now we have the contrasting pairs. We have the confusable pairs. That is religion and spirituality. Let's look at another confusable pair. Discriminating. If we can discriminate them, it'll help us to clarify in our mind what is spirituality, and that is the difference between morality and spirituality. Now, when we say morality, what do we mean? We mean by morality, in common parlance, we just mean the morality is that which is the ultimate good. Doing the good, knowing what is good, and doing the right thing. And a moral person, we can, generally speaking, as the word's commonly used, a moral person is a person who has managed to avoid the 7 deadly sins and who adheres to the 10 commandments. And if that's the case in your life, if you pretty much have adhering to those commandments, and if you don't have any kind of maybe a police record, you're considered to be a moral person. You're considered to be a moral, upstanding citizen. But we know, too, that moralism, is not spirituality. And we have to discriminate. It's not enough to be, in order to become spiritual, it's not enough to be moral. It's not enough to be good. It's not enough to do good. You have to be godly. You have to do good, you have to do karma yoga. You have to, this is what it means to become spiritual, to do spiritual practice, to do yoga sadhana. We could define spirituality really as yoga, that is, as spiritual practice, and as orienting our lives to doing spiritual practice. These spiritual practices, morality and spirituality, they go together. They're both on the line of renunciation. Everybody has to renounce. But there's a line. First moral, then spiritual. The morality, they go together. First comes, it's just like the bud and the blooming and blossoming of a flower. First comes the bud, then comes the flower. The both go together. We can't have the spirituality without the morality to form the basis. So similarly, these two go together. It's like the religion and spirituality. Also, they're very similar words, and yet they're we can imagine concentric circles. That really the spirituality is like the interior circle, often compared with like a pearl in the oyster. The oyster is just the exoteric part, and the interior part is the spirituality. So, like this, we have these Confusables. We have religion, spirituality. We have morality and spirituality. And the last one, let me discriminate between New Age spirituality and Vedanta spirituality. Now, the New Age, speaking to you, those of you who are older and wiser, the New Age was part of the counterculture movement in America, 1960s, later on. And the New Agers visualized an emergence of a new world, of elevated and enlightened spiritual consciousness, and envisioned a world in which everyone lived together in peace and in harmony with each other and with nature. And this New Age spirituality was often defined by historians as psycho-spirituality. And by that they mean is that all of the disciplines of personal growth, the human potential movement, and psychological growth was merged with the embracing of spiritual traditions of all the different religions. And so we got a very pluralistic and inclusive ideal of many forms of personal growth and spiritual practice. But New Age spirituality is pluralistic, but it's also eclectic. It celebrates diversity, but it has no unity. It is lacking it has no philosophy. This is why the Vedanta is also a philosophy and a pluralistic. That is, it is also a worldview that embraces all manners of personal growth and all manners of forms of religion and spiritual practice. But it does so by finding unity in diversity, by identifying fundamental principles and hierarchy that unify and organize the whole, the map, the global map, as it were, and therefore gives us a vision of seeing the one in the many, seeing God in everything. So that it's good for us to distinguish here between Vedantic, what mean here by spirituality, and I would suggest that maybe it is that the Vedanta philosophy and yoga psychology gives us the most comprehensive understanding of the answer to our question this morning, and that is, what is spirituality?
From illusion to truth and wisdom's sight, lead us from the darkness that fills up the night. Lead us from death to endless life, to your heart of love, to your us through every veil that seems to hide your face, beyond our every ignorance, beyond both time and space. Give us strength and courage through thy blessed grace, and fill our hearts with your love. By your sweet, compassionate face. Om Tat Sat Om, Om Tat Sat Om, Om Tat Sat Om.
Well, I have a lot of announcements here. 3 announcements, not a lot. We've got Swami Vedarupananda will speak on Friday at the temple. And his subject, what's that, 5 o'clock?
Yes, 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock. His subject is emptiness. And if you don't like that topic, then you can come on Saturday night. Swami Vedarupananda will speak eloquently on the subject of fullness. So those will be good Vedanta lectures. And then on Sunday, Swami Vedarupananda has an interesting topic, and that is mindfulness with the Vedantic twist. Om Dyo Shantihi Antariksha Ham Shantihi Prithvi Shantihi Apa Shantihi O Shadaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishwe Deva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Saravam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Same Shantiredhi Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Om, peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all.